Doing IoT right involves picking the right connectivity technology. IoT devices very often are wirelessly connected. There are many options: Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, BLE, ZigBee, 5G. There also is a category of connectivity called LPWAN, low power, wide area. Think about scenarios where you need to run a device on a battery for a long time and the device may be not in range of 5G or Wi-Fi. LPWAN offers many different advantages and there are many options out there. Josh Cox from Oxit is here to tell us everything about LPWAN and to share his perspective on how to pick the right LPWAN technology for your IoT project. So go do IoT right and pick the right LPWAN network for you on the IoT Show. Hey, this is the IoT Show. I'm Olivier, your host. Thanks for tuning in. Today we will talk LPWAN, and for that we have Josh here with me. Josh is a long timer in the realm of IoT and connectivity and has a lot to say. But before we get into the technical aspects, Josh, tell us a little bit about who's Josh, from the personal standpoint. Who are you? What are you doing in life?
Yeah, well, appreciate you having me on. So I'm Josh, the CEO of Oxit. Been focused in the LPWAN space now for over a decade. And excited to be here talking a bit around IoT, which is very passionate about on my end. So thanks for having me.
Of course, LPWAN is a type of connectivity that is very interesting, especially in the IoT scenarios. Can you give us a rapid lay of the land for people who are not familiar with networking technologies besides, the regular Ethernet or Wi-Fi? Tell us a bit more about LPWAN and how it looks like in terms of the ecosystem these days.
Yeah, well, with all technologies, right, you're trying to solve problems. And LPWAN is centered around long-range, low-power, wide area network. So when you break that down into its individual components, when you think about why you pick a particular technology, the low-power, wide area network makes a lot of sense. Now, the challenge we've got is what does low power mean and getting into the nuts and bolts of that. But a lot of products that are coming onto market and today around the IoT sphere, LPWAN and LoRaWAN in particular is a very popular choice when you're really trying to maximize what that low power wide area network can mean for you and how you solve problems.
Got it. And so we had Vinke from the Things industry recently on the IoT Show, and we discussed specifically the Things network. We did discuss the trends in LoRaWAN in general, but it's not just about the Things industries and the Things network, right? There are different players in the ecosystem. Can you name a couple of them?
Yeah, I mean, as you look at deploying LPWAN, right, I typically go back to DNA, which is the device, the network, and the application. And so the Things industries and the Things network serves really well in that network component. But there are several others, include Senate, AWS has an option now, EveryNet, as well as some other options outside of LNSs and the LoRaWAN ecosystem. We also have other LPWAN style networks like Amazon Sidewalk, and we've got other options that are a little bit interesting with respect to like crypto plays where we got Helium Network and things of that nature.
Okay, so that's an ensemble of technologies actually. It's not just like one thing that will work for everything, right?
Correct. I mean, with all problems, we're looking to choose the right technology, and all of those companies have their unique selling proposition that they're bringing to the market. And I don't think all their Venn diagrams perfectly overlap, and that's what really makes my job fun, is that we get to listen to what problems we're trying to solve and then advise and educate on what the options are and recommend the different paths customers should go on.
Yeah, and that's the experience part of you and the company you're running, which is called Oxit, helping people define, what they really need and so on. Let's actually start with the very basics. Why would someone want to use, or should someone consider using LP1s versus the most common and well-known technologies like Wi-Fi, 5G, or on smaller range locally ZigBee or BLE? What are the main aspects of LP1 that are interesting? You already alluded to some of them, but I want you to give me the teacher version of that.
Yeah, well, no technology is a silver bullet. And if you're choosing a technology, you certainly want to be tying that to what you're trying to accomplish. But when you get into the how and why we would choose LPWAN, right, this is certainly going to be centered around typically looking at cost, not just our development cost, but also our OPEX cost, what it's going to take to keep that device in the field and operating. In addition to that, right, we're beyond the cost element, we're also looking at how that can drive long time lifetime of the device. So that typically plays into cost as well, because if you can reduce your battery size and make the device last longer, you can again drive back to cost. So while all roads seem to point towards cost, I think the other one is enabling. So when I look at what it takes to sell and operate a device and get it out into the field, what we're looking at is some of the most difficult challenges to solve are getting the device actually online and connected. And so while Wi-Fi might work really well in the home, is it going to help you monitor and work with things outside the home or at the perimeter of the home? So in addition, though, also think about that problem continues to play out. So what if you're a city and you're trying to monitor a device? This might be where you're looking at cellular versus LPWAN. And again, if you start to optimize that cost and really look at how can I deploy and keep a device up there and running, that's where the LP WAN starts to come into the conversation for the cellular versus the other technology options.
Interesting. There's something very specific, I think, or at least that is very interesting about LoRaWAN in particular, and that has been, from my perspective, all the fuss around it, which is this notion of having the ability to have a private network and or a public network. And the Things Network has been is a community that's been growing, initiated by the Things Industries and several other players that consisted in promoting LoRaWAN by allowing people to share the access to basically the internet through their local gateways. And so you could roam around and have your LoRa device connect through a gateway that is not yours to the internet. And that's a very interesting concept, because now you can think about extending your own private and personal network to something that is broader. But tell me more about, where things are at when it comes to public versus private network, how that really works, and what are your recommendations in general when it comes to the choice between one or the other?
Yeah, I certainly think this is a regional discussion as well, because here in the North America region, we solve the problems a little more uniquely than some of the other areas. And one of the things I like to highlight there is the word public. Public isn't like a public utility or anything of that nature. And so often they're kind of public private. So in the way that you just described with the Things Industries and the Things Network, and the way they're offering that, right? They're a private company allowing for a public kind of network that you can roam across. The way we kind of look at problem solving and the way we look at choosing the right network that you might want to deploy there is the idea of the public network is leveraging a network that already exists. The idea of a private network is you're kind of standing up your own network. And so when you look at companies today, especially here in the US, that are starting their own business or starting a new business line, a lot of the old style might kind of push them to go into, I want to create a private network because I want to own that network. And that's my unique selling proposition, is that I'm creating and owning a network. And that allows me to capture and retain my market. So very strong players in the market really like that idea of creating something very private, that it's theirs. They're paying for the capital equipment, and they're able to leverage that. But there's other applications where you've got perhaps like tracking applications that are really going to lean to the idea that I want to know where that asset is, no matter where it's at. So I really want to be able to leverage the network that's out there. And obviously leads to one of the challenges, though, is of a public network is how widespread is it? How widespread is it deployed? And is that actually a real value proposition to me? And going back to my argument around the regions, here, the North America is very large amount of area. There's not a lot of public networks that are covering huge amount of areas that I can depend on. A couple of asterisks there. There are some solutions as we get into like Helium and Amazon Sidewalk, but certainly in other regions, we can see entire countries covered and have very good coverage.
I like that you started saying like, private public versus fully public. There's this, not a debate, but there's always that question about which one should I go with, right? And debate because there are solutions like the Amazon Sidewalk one, which seems to be, looks to me, that's personal opinion, as a walled garden thing where, Amazon is enabling a network of theirs through the Echo devices that are deployed at their customers. And so at the end of the day, you have to pick one or the other if you want to connect, if you don't want to deploy your own or can't deploy your own one. But do you have a perspective opinion on, rule of thumbs? What is the way to approach that choice of should I go private? Should I go public? And if public, which one should I attach myself to? Because, if you go Sidewalk, you get an attached to that because it's not actual, full LoRaWAN. If you go Helium, you're going to have an attached to it as well. If you go the Thing Stack, you're going to have an attached to that. So the choice is important, right? And it's not just like generic LoRaWAN. It's going to work everywhere. What is your recommendation? What are your rule of thumbs? What is your, guidebook for picking the right LPWAN network?
Yeah, so when I look at approaching that problem, one of the most challenging issues of any IoT device, and I think you said this recently, hardware is hard. Getting a product to market is hard, and then keeping it in market is also hard. Hardware components, systems change. They don't stay stagnant. When I think of what we have to do as hardware engineers and bringing products, is we're bringing a culmination of many different companies together to build any hardware. And that's actually what makes it so difficult, is the orchestration of all these different solutions. When I look at what it takes to be successful, I'm all about future proofing. So I really like the idea is that we can create hardware that can work with LoRaWAN, it can work with many LNS partners, but it can also support the Amazon Sidewalk play. And so doing that duality approach enables us to take advantage of the right technology at the right time when it works, but also allows us to be more flexible where we need to be. So as an example, Amazon Sidewalk is just covering the USA. So we don't have support in Canada and Mexico or anywhere else. Mm-hmm. But that being said, it's a very powerful network here in North America for some applications. But for others, we're leaning much more towards that, putting in a private network, typically here in the US. Broadly speaking, if I had to select a network today, it's really about what I'm trying to accomplish as a business. So am I looking for the guys who are going to help me deploy gateways, help me put out the gateways and manage them and make sure they're running? Am I really more focused on making sure I can run that in my own cloud environment? And that's really important to me. Or perhaps I'm thinking, hey, what's the solution that gives me the most flexibility? So all of those kind of levers really make a choice. And so for me, it's not about saying this one's the best, but identifying the parameters and laying those out and then choosing the right option that makes sense.
Got it. So in a nutshell, if I had to summarize, it's future-proofing and use cases, like really understanding the customer's use case before suggesting one or the other or several of these options to them. Actually, did you ever recommend a customer to not connect their device at some point? Looking at their use case and they really wanted to connect, and you said, well, maybe you don't want to.
I've certainly had use cases where someone was very much trying to do something with like Bluetooth, and I was nudging them to say, do that with Wi-Fi instead. So I think a lot of times it's they haven't chosen the right technology. For me, typically, if the business is growing data can be leveraged to help that business grow faster, but it has to be tied to revenue. So where I'm typically pushing back, though, is where we don't really have a business case. IoT, for the sake of IoT, is not creating value for the business, and we
Thank
can't
you.
accomplish any objective. So rather than saying, no, it shouldn't be connectivity, I'm more about saying, how are we going to make money here? Is there a real business opportunity? And kind of forcing that conversation. I mean, if you don't know what your OPEX and your CAPEX cost are to get to market, then you can't make an ROI argument. And a lot of companies really don't understand what it's going to take to get to market, what it's going to take to stay in market. And that's really the value proposition that I'm really trying to get people to get on for that entire life cycle journey, and making sure that's actually going to be revenue generating and a positive experience for them.
I like that a lot. I was saying, like, thank you for saying that. I'm not the only one saying that, but I think we should pound that to anyone who's looking at IoT. Is like, you have to have a use case, you have to have a business value to the project that is meaningful for you to even consider it, because IoT is hard. Despite what everyone is trying to tell you, IoT is hard. And the embedded side of things, connectivity, security, cloud platforms, everything is hard about it. Good for us, because we can help people, get into it. I'd like for you for 1 second. You have expertise. It's proven. You know this domain. We'll point people to your website after, because it's important that they know where to find you when they need help in that topic. How about you pull out your crystal ball for a second and you tell me, what do you think? What do you predict LoRaWAN will look like in maybe 5 years from now? I was when it came out, or when we first heard about it, I was super excited about the idea that maybe we're gonna have the usual, cellular operators adopting it and deploying gateways on every single of their, GSM and LTE whatever antennas. It didn't happen. They're more pushing on 5G and things like that. But from your perspective, what do you see LoRaWAN's, place in the next years from now?
Yeah, well, I think what's really interesting about LoRaWAN and LPWAN technology is its pace of innovation is somewhat unique, in that there's a kind of physical limitation to how much literal improvement we can see. Whereas with cellular, you've gone to the 3Gs to 4Gs to 5Gs, and it's all about increasing the amount of data you can push through. But what people don't recognize is every time they're increasing that number, they're sort of reducing the range. What's very interesting about the LoRaWAN space is that the innovation that I can expect over the next 5 years, and I certainly think there can be some range additions. Just we're still focused on small data packets, and in that kind of sphere of that, we're going to see incremental improvements, not major changes in that way. But to your point, where the major innovations are going to happen, I believe, over the next 5 years, is how you weave all of that into what IoT means. And I go back to my future proofing. The silicon vendors and things of that nature are very kind of pointed at single piece of silicon, the Swiss Army knives, devices that can do everything. And so I expect to see Swiss Army knives becoming commonplace for us, like how we can actually deploy hardware and make those decisions of the right communication protocol. I think Amazon Sidewalk is a great example of that, because Amazon Sidewalk can work over LoRa, CSS, can work over FSK, and work over Bluetooth. And I think we're going to continue to see that narrative grow, where we're going to have devices with multiple connectivity options and weaving that together. I'll add on to that. For me, the other piece is just batteryless designs. I really think we're almost there. And I think over the course of the next 5 years, we're going to see a lot more energy harvesting solar devices, devices that just can run. And that's going to do a lot for us in the IoT market to drive our costs down, but also, create more environmentally, devices that don't hurt the environment as bad, with all our batteries and lithiums that we're chucking in these things. So
Yeah,
those
and
are my two big ones.
I like that a lot, and I think having that concern about making sure we lower the power consumption, with that in mind, with the planet in mind, I think is super important. It's little by little, Contrarily to what everyone or many people think, you don't need to send a lot of data to the cloud to make your systems intelligent, right? There's lots of things you can do in order to optimize at the edge. Seed Studio have a very interesting LoRaWAN device that has a tiny camera and can run tiny ML in there to do inference on a LoRaWAN battery powered device. And that's fascinating because these trends, this kind of trends, will lead to bringing that intelligence to tinier devices without the need to share too much data with the rest of the infrastructures and systems. So that's astonishing. I love that a lot, and I think it's progressing super fast. I think the 5 years that I asked you about might be actually shortened based on what we're seeing. And industries or industrials like Amazon taking an opinionated stance at this domain can help as well because they make choices. They're not the only option, but they are offering a valid option for certain scenarios. Josh, thanks a lot. I think people now hopefully understand better what LP1 is about and what it can do for them, and are starting scratching in the head. What is my use case? So what I want for them to realize is that you have a company of experts, yourself and others, that can help them. Oxit.com is where to find them. A little tiny word about Oxit and how you approach your customer engagements.
Yeah, well, I've been in the LPWAN now for a decade. Oxit does everything from engineering services. We help clients go from idea to getting to market and stay in market. So that's hardware, firmware, cloud, application development. And we're very focused and accustomed to this. We've taken hundreds of products to market within the LoRaWAN ecosystem. And as far as our process, we're typically working with clients, making sure they've got great requirements, good technical documentation up front, make sure we can identify where we're going and how to get there. And then we take clients on that journey, get them across the finish line, and keep them in market.
Awesome, Josh. Love it. Thanks a lot for your time today, everyone. Thanks for watching the IoT show. See you soon. Bye.
Take care. Bye.